There are people who destroy you with aggression, people who destroy you with charm, and people who destroy you without you realizing they were ever against you. Cinematic slow zoom on an antique marble bust of Machiavelli in low chiaroscuro lighting. The most dangerous personality is rarely the loudest one in the room. Power does not always announce itself through anger, wealth, authority, or intimidation. Sometimes it arrives as sympathy, sometimes as confidence, sometimes as friendship, and sometimes it arrives wearing the face of a person who seems completely harmless. This is where most people make their first strategic mistake. They judge character by appearance instead of incentives. They listen to what a person says, while ignoring what that person repeatedly does when nobody is watching. They study the mask instead of the mechanism beneath it. They ask whether someone is good or bad when the more important question is much colder. What does this person want, and what are they willing to sacrifice to obtain it? Cinematic close-up of a chessboard under a single overhead light. One black king isolated from every other piece. 3 dark personality patterns appear again and again, wherever human beings compete for status, money, attention, influence, and control. They are often discussed as psychological categories, but their deeper significance is strategic. These patterns reveal different methods of extracting advantage from other people. One seeks dominance, one seeks admiration, one seeks opportunity. And the most sophisticated individual can move between all 3 masks depending on what the situation demands. This does not mean every ambitious person is secretly dangerous. It does not mean every confident person is manipulative. Psychology is not a collection of labels to throw at people you dislike. The real value lies in learning to recognize recurring behavioral patterns before they become expensive. Because the cost of misunderstanding a person is rarely emotional alone, it can become financial, it can become reputational, it can become professional, and in extreme cases it can become existential. Dark silhouette of an elegant man standing before floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking a rain-swept metropolis at night. Imagine entering a business relationship with someone who appears extraordinarily generous. He introduces you to influential people. He gives you access. He offers advice. He makes opportunities appear. You feel fortunate. Months later, you discover that every favor created an invisible obligation. The introduction requires loyalty. The access requires silence. The advice requires obedience. The opportunity requires dependence. Nothing was technically forced upon you. That is precisely why the mechanism worked. The strongest forms of influence rarely feel like chains when they are first placed around you. They feel like gifts. Pause there, because this is one of the oldest principles of power. Control becomes more efficient when the controlled person believes the arrangement was their own choice. Cinematic macro shot of a golden gift box resting on black marble, with a nearly invisible chain disappearing beneath it. A dark personality does not necessarily appear cruel. Cruelty is often inefficient. A sophisticated manipulator understands that fear creates resistance, while dependency creates cooperation. This is why charm can be more dangerous than hostility. Hostility tells you where the threat is. Charm can make you invite the threat inside. History is filled with political courts where survival depended less upon defeating enemies than upon correctly identifying intentions. Renaissance rulers understood that a flattering advisor could become more dangerous than an open rival. Courts were environments of information asymmetry. A ruler knew what he wanted, but he could never completely know what everyone around him wanted. That uncertainty created the central problem of political power. How do you distinguish loyalty from strategy? Cinematic Renaissance palace corridor. Nobles whispering in small groups while one solitary ruler watches silently from the shadows. The answer was never simply to trust nobody. That is childish paranoia. The stronger principle is to trust patterns rather than promises. Observe what happens when someone receives no reward. Observe how they behave when they lose status. Observe how they react when you say no. Observe what happens when another person receives the attention they wanted. Observe whether their kindness survives inconvenience. These moments reveal more than carefully rehearsed conversations ever will. A person can manufacture a charming introduction in 5 minutes. They can maintain an impressive image for months, but pressure exposes architecture, and pressure is where character becomes visible. Cinematic close-up of a composed businessman smiling, while a crack slowly spreads across a glass reflection behind him. The first dark pattern is domination. This personality seeks control because control creates psychological security. They may not always shout. They may not always threaten. Their preferred method can be much subtler. They interrupt. They redefine agreements after the fact. They create uncertainty and then position themselves as the person who can resolve it. They make other people compete for approval. They punish independence. They reward obedience. And slowly, the environment begins reorganizing itself around their preferences. This is optical power, the appearance that everyone is acting freely while the actual range of available choices has already been narrowed. A weak strategist asks, "Who is in charge?" A stronger strategist asks, "Who determines the available options?" Cinematic overhead shot of several chess pieces positioned around one seemingly trapped king. That distinction matters. The person who controls the choices does not need to control every action. Consider a workplace where one executive never directly orders people to remain loyal. Instead, he controls access to promotions, information, introductions, and desirable projects. Employees begin adjusting their behavior before he ever asks. That is leverage. The visible authority is only the surface. The real authority exists in dependency. And dependency is one of the most important concepts in understanding dark personalities. If someone can remove something you desperately need, they possess leverage over you. Money creates leverage. Information creates leverage. Status creates leverage. Access creates leverage. Secrets create leverage. Even emotional approval can become leverage when someone has trained you to depend upon it. Cinematic close-up of a hand slowly tightening around a thin red thread connected to another person's wrist. The second pattern is admiration. This personality does not necessarily seek obedience first. They seek reflection. They want to see themselves reflected in the attention, praise, admiration, and emotional reactions of other people. Their world becomes organized around status. They may appear charismatic, ambitious, generous, even inspirational. But watch what happens when the spotlight moves elsewhere. The mask becomes thinner. A colleague receives the promotion. A rival receives the applause. A friend becomes more successful. Someone challenges their expertise. Suddenly the atmosphere changes. Their response may not be explosive. It may arrive as a joke, a subtle insult, a dismissive comment, or an apparently reasonable criticism. The purpose is not always to destroy the other person. Sometimes it is simply to reduce them, because reducing another person's status can temporarily restore one's own. Cinematic luxury gala where one person stands alone in darkness, while another receives applause beneath brilliant lights. This is where social competition becomes psychologically sophisticated. The amateur competes openly. The strategist watches who needs to win. That distinction is enormous. A person who constantly needs recognition can become predictable because their desires are visible. Give them applause and they move closer. Threaten their status and they become reactive. Offer admiration and they lower their defenses. Predictability creates leverage. And this leads to the third pattern, exploitation of opportunity. Some personalities are less interested in domination or admiration than extraction. They see relationships through utility. Who can provide access? Who has money? Who has influence? Who has information? Who can open a door? Who can absorb risk? Who can take the blame? Cinematic darkroom filled with portraits of influential people, each portrait connected by thin glowing lines to a calculating central figure. This personality can be extraordinarily pleasant. That is what makes them difficult to detect. They understand reciprocity. They remember birthdays. They offer favors. They appear generous. But their relationships have an accounting system. Every interaction is quietly measured. Every connection is evaluated. Every favor is an investment. And when the expected return disappears, the relationship suddenly becomes less interesting. The mistake is believing that because someone behaves warmly, their intentions must be warm. Warmth and strategy can coexist. Generosity and calculation can coexist. Affection and ambition can coexist. Human beings are not psychologically simple machines. The strategist, therefore, avoids moral naivety without falling into paranoia. You do not need to assume everyone is manipulating you. You need to become difficult to manipulate. Cinematic solitary figure standing calmly in a crowded room while everyone else appears blurred around him. That requires one fundamental discipline. Do not reveal your deepest dependency too early. If someone knows exactly what you fear losing, they know where your leverage points are. If they know how desperately you need approval, they know how to control your emotions. If they know how badly you need money, they can dictate terms. If they know you cannot tolerate rejection, they can make you negotiate against yourself. Your vulnerabilities become expensive when placed in the hands of people who treat relationships as transactions. This is why calculated detachment is not emotional coldness. It is strategic insulation. You can care about people without becoming dependent upon their approval. You can cooperate without surrendering autonomy. You can accept opportunity without becoming owned by the person who provided it. Cinematic close-up of a man removing a golden chain from his wrist and placing it on a dark table. The deepest lesson is not to become dark yourself. It is to understand darkness well enough that it cannot easily disguise itself as virtue. Because the most dangerous person is not always the person who looks evil. It is the person whose incentives you never bothered to examine. And once you understand that, human behavior begins to look different. You stop asking who appears powerful. You start asking who possesses leverage. You stop asking who seems generous. You start asking what the generosity creates. You stop asking who is charming. You start asking what happens when the charm fails. Cinematic slow push toward a black chess king, surrounded by fallen white pieces. The world becomes less mysterious when you stop interpreting behavior through appearances and start interpreting it through incentives. But there is a deeper layer still, because recognizing these personalities is only the defensive half of the game. The more important question is what happens when these patterns become embedded inside institutions, businesses, relationships, and systems of wealth. That is where psychology stops being merely personal and becomes structural. This is where Machiavellian thinking becomes more useful than simple personality labels. A personality is only part of the equation. Environment determines which traits become profitable. Cinematic slow tracking shot through a Renaissance political chamber, powerful figures seated beneath enormous shadowed columns. A person may possess ambition, vanity, aggression, or manipulative intelligence, but those qualities become strategically significant only when the surrounding system rewards them. Put a highly competitive personality inside a chaotic organization, and ruthlessness can become an advantage. Put the same personality inside a disciplined institution with transparent incentives and strong accountability, and the advantage may disappear. This is why sophisticated power analysis never stops at personality. It studies the architecture around the personality, who controls information, who controls resources, who controls access, who determines reputation, who can punish failure, who can reward loyalty, and perhaps most importantly, who can change the rules without appearing to change them. Cinematic overhead shot of an enormous chessboard representing an entire city, with a few powerful hands moving pieces from above. Machiavelli understood something that naive moralism consistently misses. People do not behave according to ideals alone. They respond to incentives, fear, opportunity, status, and necessity. A society can preach equality while rewarding hierarchy. An organization can celebrate teamwork while secretly rewarding political maneuvering. A company can claim that performance matters while promotions depend heavily upon proximity to power. The surface story and the operating system can be completely different. That difference is where strategic intelligence begins. You must learn to distinguish stated values from actual incentives. If an organization says, "We reward honesty," but dishonest people consistently rise faster, the real rule is not the slogan. The real rule is the reward structure. If a company says, "Everyone has an equal voice," but only certain people can terminate careers, then equality exists rhetorically, not structurally. If a social group claims to value independence but punishes anyone who stops seeking approval, then conformity is the real currency. Cinematic close-up of a polished corporate mission statement dissolving into a dark map of hidden connections. This principle extends directly into wealth. Money is not merely something you possess. Money gives you optionality. Optionality gives you bargaining power. Bargaining power gives you independence. And independence changes how other people can treat you. A person with no financial reserves negotiates differently from a person who can walk away. A business owner dependent upon one client negotiates differently from one whose revenue comes from dozens. An employee with no alternatives accepts conditions that another employee can reject. This is why wealth mastery begins much earlier than investing. It begins with reducing dependency. Cinematic shot of two businessmen negotiating across a black marble table, one calm and relaxed, the other visibly tense. The person with alternatives has leverage. The person without alternatives has urgency, and urgency is expensive. When you desperately need a deal, you stop evaluating the deal objectively. You start protecting the possibility of the deal. That distinction destroys fortunes. A desperate entrepreneur accepts unfavorable financing because he needs capital now. A desperate employee accepts a degrading arrangement because he needs the paycheck now. A desperate investor buys an asset because he is terrified of missing the opportunity. In every case, the same psychological mechanism appears. The shortage of alternatives compresses judgment. The more dependent you become upon one outcome, the more power that outcome gains over you. Pause and examine your own life. Where are your alternatives weakest? That is probably where your negotiating position is weakest. Cinematic solitary figure standing before three locked doors, with one small illuminated door visible in the distance. The first principle of strategic independence is therefore brutally simple. Never allow one person, one income stream, one relationship, one institution, or one opportunity to become your entire world. Concentration creates vulnerability. Diversification creates resilience. This does not mean scattering your attention across everything. It means building enough optionality that you can refuse what should be refused. The person who can walk away possesses a different psychological posture from the person who cannot. And people feel that difference. They may not be able to explain it, but they sense it. Confidence is often the visible consequence of invisible alternatives. Cinematic close-up of a calm businessman closing a contract folder and standing up from a negotiation table while others watch. Now consider the three dark patterns again. The dominator wants control over your choices. The admirer wants control over attention and status. The exploiter wants control over your usefulness. Their methods differ, but their objective often converges: dependency. This is why a person who understands leverage does not obsess over detecting evil. They monitor dependency. Who needs whom? Who can leave? Who cannot? Who possesses information that others require? Who possesses money that others need? Who has access to opportunities? Who has the authority to approve or deny? Cinematic macro shot of a network of glowing red lines connecting people, with one central node controlling most of the connections. The answers reveal the real hierarchy, not the hierarchy printed on an organizational chart. the hierarchy operating underneath it. That hidden hierarchy is often far more important. A junior employee may officially report to a manager, while the manager privately depends upon that employee for critical technical knowledge. A small supplier may appear weak, while secretly controlling the only reliable source of a crucial component. A quiet investor may appear passive while possessing the capital required to keep the entire structure alive. Power is frequently invisible because people confuse visibility with control. The loudest person in the room may have the least leverage. The quietest person may possess the exit. Cinematic dark boardroom where a silent figure at the far end subtly controls every illuminated screen. This is why Machiavellian strategy emphasizes perception. Optical power matters. People respond not only to what you possess, but to what they believe you possess. A person perceived as desperate is treated differently. A person perceived as replaceable is treated differently. A person perceived as financially unstable is treated differently. A person perceived as capable of walking away is treated differently. This does not mean pretending to possess resources you do not have. That is fragile theater. Real strategic presence comes from building actual capability and revealing only what is necessary. The amateur displays everything. The strategist manages information. Cinematic close-up of an elegant black briefcase being closed, while documents disappear into darkness information, is itself a form of capital. The person who knows everyone's incentives but reveals nothing about his own possesses asymmetry, and asymmetry creates advantage. Suppose you are negotiating with someone who knows your deadline, your maximum budget, your fears, and your alternatives. You know almost nothing about theirs. You are not negotiating from equal ground. You are negotiating inside their information architecture. This is why emotional transparency can become strategically dangerous in high-stakes environments. Honesty is valuable. Unfiltered disclosure is not always wisdom. You can be truthful without being completely exposed. You can be sincere without revealing every pressure acting upon you. You can cooperate without publishing your entire strategy. Cinematic close-up of two players facing each other across a chessboard, one player calmly concealing a card beneath the table. There is another principle that separates sophisticated operators from impulsive competitors. Do not confuse speed with strength. Dark personalities often exploit urgency. They manufacture artificial deadlines. They create emotional pressure. They force immediate decisions. Why? Because time pressure reduces analytical capacity. A person given 10 minutes to decide is more likely to protect emotion than structure. A person given 10 days can investigate, compare, negotiate, consult, walk away. The ability to slow down is therefore a form of power. When someone says, "You need to decide right now," do not automatically accept their clock. Ask why the clock exists. Cinematic ticking antique clock in a dark room, its hands moving while a calm figure remains completely still. Sometimes urgency is legitimate. Sometimes it is manufactured. The strategic mind distinguishes between the two. This is particularly important in wealth. Financial predators rarely sell products as simply as products. They sell urgency. They sell scarcity. They sell exclusivity. They sell the fear that everyone else is getting rich while you are standing still. The emotional sequence is predictable: fear of missing out, compressed analysis, impulsive commitment, delayed regret. The antidote is not cynicism. It is process. Never allow excitement to become your due diligence department. Cinematic luxury investment presentation with glowing numbers reflected in the eyes of an anxious investor. A sovereign operator builds rules before emotion arrives. You decide in advance what risks you will accept, what debt you will tolerate, what percentage of your capital can be exposed, what evidence is required before committing, what conditions allow you to exit. This is strategic stoicism applied to wealth. You do not attempt to control markets, competitors, or other people's behavior. You control your exposure to them. That is a profound distinction. Control is often impossible. Positioning is not. Cinematic figure calmly observing a violent storm through reinforced glass, while the city outside is illuminated by lightning. The strongest person in a volatile environment is not necessarily the one who predicts every movement. It is the one who can survive being wrong. That is why reserves matter, why multiple income sources matter, why reputation matters, why skills matter, why relationships matter, why liquidity matters. They create resilience against uncertainty, and resilience reduces the leverage that other people can exert upon you. Now we arrive at a more uncomfortable truth. Some people intentionally keep themselves surrounded by dependent individuals because dependence makes leadership easier. They create small debts, small favors, small opportunities, small obligations. Then they accumulate. 1 favor is harmless. 10 favors become a pattern. 50 favors become architecture. Cinematic montage of tiny golden chains gradually connecting together into one massive chain around a human silhouette. This is how social debt can evolve into political capital. A person helps you secure a position. Later, you are expected to support them. They introduce you to someone influential. Later, you owe them access. They defend you during a crisis. Later, silence is expected. The original transaction may never be mentioned again. That is the elegance of invisible leverage. The debt does not need to be spoken because both parties understand it exists. This is why you must distinguish gratitude from submission. Gratitude says, I appreciate what you did. Submission says, because you helped me once, you now possess authority over my future. Those are not the same thing. Cinematic close-up of a golden chain lying beside an open door, symbolizing gratitude versus captivity. A sovereign person repays legitimate debts without surrendering sovereignty. They return favors when appropriate. They honor agreements. They recognize generosity, but they do not allow gratitude to become permanent political ownership. This distinction is essential because the opposite extreme is also dangerous. A person who refuses every favor becomes isolated. Isolation creates its own vulnerability. No serious operator succeeds entirely alone. Power requires networks. Capital requires trust. Business requires cooperation. Knowledge requires exchange. The objective is not to eliminate dependence completely. That is impossible. The objective is to avoid catastrophic dependence. Build relationships where value flows in both directions. Build partnerships where either side can survive without destroying the other. Build networks where no single node can collapse your entire structure. Cinematic aerial view of a vast network of illuminated bridges connecting independent cities. That is the difference between interdependence and captivity. Interdependence creates mutual strength. Captivity creates one-sided leverage. And once you understand that distinction, even your relationships begin to look different. You start asking a quieter question. Does this relationship expand my freedom or gradually reduce it? Some people enter your life and increase your capabilities. Others increase your obligations. Some challenge your thinking. Others require you to constantly manage their emotions. Some create opportunity. Others create dependency disguised as opportunity. The difference is not always obvious at the beginning. That is why observation matters more than first impressions. Cinematic slow-motion sequence of 2 paths dividing in a dark forest, one illuminated by golden light and the other disappearing into fog. If you are serious about this level of strategic thinking, there is a reason to keep this archive close. These principles are not designed for people looking for comforting answers. They are for serious operators willing to examine incentives, power, wealth, psychology, and their own vulnerabilities without decoration. If that is the kind of strategic analysis you want to return to, subscribe and enter the archive. The value is not in collecting quotes. It is in learning to see the machinery beneath the quote. Because once you understand the machinery, you stop being impressed by the surface. You see the incentive behind the compliment. the dependency behind the favor, the leverage behind the opportunity, the insecurity behind the status display, and the strategic objective behind the smile. Cinematic close-up of a smiling executive whose reflection in a glass wall appears completely emotionless. But there is still a deeper problem. What happens when the person using these mechanisms is not your competitor? What happens when it is your employer, your business partner, your closest friend, or worse, yourself? Because the most dangerous strategic blindness is not failing to recognize dark behavior in other people. It is failing to recognize the same impulses operating inside your own decisions.